Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Follow Your Passion podcast. Let me introduce my guest of today. His name is Pat Daly. Pat is a true entrepreneur. He sold his ownership of the first company he started, Convergent Performance, in 2020. He ran a second business, Blue Thread Enterprise, for 5 years, which was a single project business, and started his third business, Boundary Layer Incorporated, in 2018. He's also passionate about writing sci-fi. So who knows, I might be talking to the next George Lucas. Welcome, Pat. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Aaron. Very nice to be here.
So tell me, first of all, about your businesses. You're currently running your third business. Are they all similar, or are they totally different than from your first business?
They're fairly similar, although I have pivoted with Boundary Layer to a more flight safety focused business and specializing in flight test for new aircraft, new flying projects, everything from hydrogen powered vehicles to drones and things like that. So there are some similarities along the way.
Nice. And your first business, Convergent Performance, which you sold your own ownership in 2020, that was also technology based, I presume?
It was. We along the way, I had met some other gentlemen who seemed to be thinking along the way that I was, and we were all consulting for another company. And after a meeting and a series of events, we sat down to dinner one night and we decided that we could do it better. We could do it better than the company that was paying us to consult. And so we sat around the table and we said, okay, within a year, we will all quit our jobs because we all had other full-time jobs. Mm-hmm. And we will launch Convergent Performance as our sole business.
Oh, wow.
And it was scary, but it ended up working out well for all of us.
Nice. It takes a certain intrinsic motivation and belief as well to be able to make such a bold step, I would say.
Oh, it does. I think you have to believe in yourself and not be afraid to make that step. And for us, it was it was not the best time personally. We were coming up on some financial needs in terms of paying for our children's education. And so in the first 2 years of that business, we burned through all of our cash reserves. It was very expensive before it got profitable.
I can totally imagine that. First you have to invest in the company before you can start making money or even break even.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was we were all so debt averse that none of us wanted to go to a bank or a lender and get seed capital or bring on other investors. We didn't want to dilute ownership at the time. And so we all ended up putting a lot of our personal money into the company. And I think that worked out well, but that only got us to a certain level. And I think now, looking back at it, I think that if we had used venture capital or investor capital, we could have grown larger quicker. And I think that would have been good all around.
Yeah, but that's hindsight. We always know best when we look at the past. But it also shows how committed you were, right? If you would have started with seed capital or an angel investor or whatever, there's less flesh on the hook from your side, right? And now putting in your own spares, your own savings, it shows how committed you were to make it a success because there was no turning back, right? You had nothing to fall back on. So you had to make it a success.
I love that phrase of yours, more flesh on the hook. That's absolutely true. You have to have a little bit of risk to yourself personally in order to motivate you to go beyond what you've been comfortable doing.
Yeah. So what made you decide to sell your ownership of that company, start a second, and eventually a third business?
Okay, the business was going well. We had at the time 4 equal owners of the company, and I found myself loving the customers and not being happy at work at the same time. We had some fundamental differences in how we wanted to approach the company, whether or not it was time to do that, get a little investment and move on, or build, or if it was time to retrench because we were coming up on some scary economic times. COVID, when I made the decision, COVID hadn't really become a big deal yet. So we had gone from a lot of in-person events with big crowds of customers, 400 or 500 people in a room, and just looking at it, that's not sustainable for a small company because it very much becomes the entrepreneur-based and a personality-based business. And so in order to expand, you need to come up with different ways, different technologies to do that. And we had some fundamental differences with that. And eventually I was just tired of having the same discussions every day and not getting anywhere. So I made the offer to sell my equity to my partners. And at first they said, "Oh, no, we're not interested in doing that. We can't do that." But then over time, perhaps my dissatisfaction became apparent, and they decided to let me off the hook. And I was very happy that we came to an amicable resolution, and I could walk away with that and start something on my own.
Perfect. It's recognizable because when I work with my clients as well, I always I ask them to define their vision. What's their delta on the horizon. I ask them what the mission is, and I also define their core values with them. Because in my opinion, if you have this mission, vision, your core values, then the people you work with, or maybe you've outsourced it or partner with, they should at least associate with the same values and mission and vision. Because if there are already differences on that level, there will be some struggles down the road, because if there's a mismatch, it won't work. You got different routes, and you just have to have one route to the future. So I can imagine that you started out with the right intentions, but then in the end, if there's a mismatch, then it's better to separate than to stay arguing and fighting over it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely correct in terms of you have to have the same mission, vision, and core values. You all have to know that you are equally yoked to the success of the business, and that you're all pulling in the same direction. And sometimes we're pulling in opposite directions, and you don't make any progress doing that.
No, you're just having the status quo at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you come from technical companies, you have a technical background. Is that also the motivation to start writing sci-fi?
I think that's part of it. I've always been a tech kind of guy. I got my degrees in engineering, so I've always been focused on that. I've always loved sci-fi. Growing up, I loved reading, all the classics, the Heinleins and Clarke and Asimov. And then as tech grew, some new authors came into my scan, and William Gibson and Neil Stephenson certainly were big influences. And I thought, Well, okay. I'm enough of an egotist that I thought I can do that. I can write stories, and so I jumped into it. I took a chance on it, and it was both highly rewarding personally and also highly frustrating. It turns out that not everyone thinks that your words are as beautiful as you do.
Of course. Yeah. So was it? Did it take you a long time to finish your first story, or did you have several revisions?
It took me lots of revisions. I finished the first draft in about a year, and I thought it was immaculate. Who would not love this novel? And I sent it out to people, and I got a lot of rejections. What's more frustrating than getting rejections is getting no response.
Mm.
So I think as human beings, even if the answer is no, we owe people that answer. That's just a personal passion of mine, that if you're not going to hire someone, if you're not going to do business with them, you still need to at least tell them. You can't just go silent. So then I joined some writing groups, and I had good luck finding some people who are willing to give me honest feedback.
Mm.
Because I'm sure you've seen this, that it is, even in the business world, it is hard sometimes to get and give honest feedback because we're worried about hurting someone's feelings.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to tell them the painful truth, but that is exactly what they need to hear. And that is exactly what I needed to hear. I have two critiques that I've kept and have on display in my office. And the first one is a nice little introduction, and then she says, at the end of the day, this is a boring story. And then I had another one that said, my God, do you even speak English?
Yeah.
And that was painful, but true, some convoluted sentences. And so with that honest feedback, I was able to improve my writing. Now, it took 8 full revisions of the manuscript before it was published. And that took another year and a half to go through all that. But now it's published. The second book, which is a sequel, is finished and will be out next year. I was hoping for December, but it looks like labor issues, supply chain issues, even the book business is slowing down. But yeah, and I've started on a third. So
nice. You know, the picture that got into my mind is, I've seen this video of duos that are challenged. You know, that one person had to tap a song on a wooden wall, and the other person was sitting on the other side of the wall, and he had to recognize which song it was. And they got frustrated sometimes because the other person couldn't get the song right. And but it's so easy, it's so obvious. But what you have to remember is that the person tapping the song, he has or she has the melody in its mind, and it's tapping along this melody. And the other person is only hearing tap, 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 a very monologue, right? He doesn't have the melody. And so I can imagine when you're writing a story, you might also have some sort of melody in your mind in which you're writing the story. But if you don't put this melody into words, the other person is just reading like facts. It's not a story. It's just like a monologue.
That is very brilliantly put. I like that a lot. It's exactly descriptive of the writing process, because you do hear all that internal melody, you hear the harmony, and if all you get down is the rhythm, then the reader is not having the same experience. So I like that. I like that description. Well said.
Thank you. It's so if I understand it correctly, you've also written some nonfiction before you started writing sci-fi. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. With Convergent, I wrote a book called CRM and ORM for corporate aviation. We were working with a lot of corporate aviation clients, and CRM is crew resource management, ORM is operational risk management. And so it was very much a nonfiction aimed at a narrow band of readers. And then I wrote several technical reports back in the days when I was in the Air Force. So yeah, I started actually writing nonfiction, even though I love fiction more, I think.
Yeah. So if you would look at the transformation from nonfiction to fiction, what are the things you had to learn or maybe even unlearn doing?
Okay. When you're writing fiction, you have to explain, I think, in greater detail, because you're creating a world that no one is familiar with. Whereas when you're writing nonfiction, it's set in a time and place and everyone understands generally how things work. But if you're writing a fiction where people are no longer using cell phones or solar power has completely replaced fossil fuels or something, you have to be more descriptive of the world and how they got to that state. So I had to learn to describe more, to show more how the world ended up the way it did.
Nice. And you know, when you're sharing that, I also think that it's an art to do that correctly, because you can overly explain the environment that you're losing. You can spend easily 4 or 5 pages explaining and exploring the environment, while you're already losing the reader at page 2, for instance. So
Yeah.
Is it hard to get down to the, let's say, the bare essentials of the environment in which the story is playing?
It is. It is. You have to. One of my favorite authors, Neil Gaiman, said that you have to be ruthless in cutting out words. That if you've written 10,000 words, you should be ready to cut 8,000 of them. And so you're constantly doing this process of, is this necessary? Is this required? And if it is required and a reader doesn't know why it's required, you need to leave some hints so they'll remember that clue. Like in a murder mystery, you have to do something to emphasize the clues that the detective will use to solve the crime, so that it's not a complete shock at the end where you go, well, how did he get there? What's the logic that leads to this? So it's, I did get somewhat verbose in my first drafts in terms of description, and the same critique group member that told me my writing was boring. At one point, she marked up my manuscript and she said, "Yeah, I stopped reading here." Lost interest. Okay, all right. Thank you for that. That lets me know where I've gone astray.
Yeah. Wow. So the topic of your stories, it's not like an alien world. I believe it's more near future. Would I describe it like that?
Yes, absolutely. Near future. A couple of things have happened that made the change to where they are. For example, a second Korean War has been fought. Nuclear weapons have been exchanged, but it's still within the foreseeable future. It's not so far in advance that people don't remember COVID, for example. The older people remember that, and some of the lessons learned or not learned from that pandemic.
Yeah.
And then also it's based in a world where solar power has become much more efficient. So it's being much more widely adopted, as well as the pivot to hydrogen as a storable fuel, as opposed to the complete reliance or near complete reliance we have on hydrocarbons.
Nice. So what made you to decide to choose that genre? Because sci-fi could also be totally other worlds, right?
Yeah. I used to, well, for a couple things. One, I like role-playing games. So I'll get online, I'll play Mass Effect or Skyrim or games along those veins. And so I had a love for that. And then I have two daughters, and they were both playing a game called Pokemon Go. Mm-hmm. And you may or may not be familiar with it, but you play it on your cell phone, and it will, every once in a while, as you walk along, a little Pokemon will appear on the screen, and you have to catch it. It's a fairly simple game, but what it does is it superimposes a virtual character on a real background.
Yeah.
And that's a form of augmented reality. And one morning, as I was walking my dogs thinking about that, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could have a theme park, a huge theme park like Disneyland, Disney World, that was based around this augmented reality. So you would see things that weren't really there, but you could interact with them. So that also became a basis for the story. And that's one of the things that worries me about writing this, is that the technology is really not that far off. And I have this fear that reality will surpass my fiction before the book comes out.
Yeah. That's amazing. But if I would write such stories, I would also be very curious what parts of my predictions, because you're actually doing some kind of predictions, become reality. Isn't that interesting to check that and to see what actually happens?
It is, and I've made kind of some technological predictions that I think may be farther in the future than I imagined them. And it may go completely a different direction. I mean, 10 years ago, it would have been nearly unthinkable to do what you and I are doing right now. Having a live video conference from separate continents. And I certainly would not have predicted, but here we are.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually funny because I saw some one of my connections on LinkedIn. He posted an article, and he said, "Isn't it amazing that with nowadays technology, he has created some friendships with people that he partnered with. They're part of his company and they're doing great, and they actually never met in person."
Yeah.
And that's almost amazing. You can't, but it's the current reality. We're working with people, and we are actually creating great friendships with them without ever have met them,
and sometimes without ever even seeing them.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that I interact with routinely, and it's only voice or text. It's never face to face. So it's a surprisingly new and more open world in that way, I think.
Yeah, but it's also funny to see what it does with your mindset. For instance, if I look at the videos that we're currently having, my camera is a little more tilted, so I look bigger than you are. But in reality, if you would meet, maybe you're even one head bigger than I am. You never know.
Yeah, true. And suddenly, just little tricks of perspective like that. And now I worry about how does my background look for a call? Do I have the right things up in the background? And should I have a green screen? It's the world has changed.
Oh yeah, definitely. So if you look at your current business and your writing business, is that easy to combine, or is it hard sometimes?
It's hard sometimes. For the writing, I need a block of time. I need to be able to focus on what I'm writing and concentrate enough that if I change something early in the story, I need to make sure that it flows all the way through correctly and I haven't missed anything. Whereas sometimes with the business, it can be just a few minutes of answering a question, or I'll need to go on site to a customer's location for days at a time. And that's all fine. I just have to balance between one business, writing, and then, oh yeah, the family. So
yeah,
it's you're always playing a little game of internal tug of war.
I can imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's but so how are you able to keep this balance?
Probably a couple of ways. The first is I get up early. I normally wake up 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I take care of some of my family duties immediately. I get the animals fed, I walk the dogs, I come back, and then by 6, usually I'm sitting down in front of my computer and I have a couple of hours of time where the house is quiet and I can work on writing. And then during the business day, I have to be willing to drop everything in order to work with customers. And then at night, I have to be willing to turn off both of those so that I can focus on the family. Because if you don't maintain that relationship as well, you're going to lose some of the things that matter to you the most. And one of the things I think you need to work in somewhere to your day is exercise. It's just so good for refreshing you mentally. And if I'm out jogging, I tend to be thinking about work problems or story problems. And sometimes the solution will come to me as I jog along.
Oh, I can totally imagine that, because it's when you're jogging, you get in some sort of trance, you get in the flow, and you don't use your conscious thinking at that moment. So you give your subconscious the room to give you the answers you were looking for.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
wonderful. That flow state. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also wonderful how you described how you are compartmentalizing your day to have certain blocks to reserve it to do certain tasks. And that makes it possible. If it's one thing that I advise with my clients as well, to use a weekly action planner, and not that you plan your week for each activity you're doing, but it's for each type of activity you're doing. And you're actually I would almost say the living proof that it works, because you've divided your day into blocks that you dedicate to a certain type of activity, like the household tasks, the writing, the customer face task, for your business, and your family time. And in between somewhere you have reserved a little block for jogging or exercising. So it's perfect. And it shows that it works.
It does. It does. May not work for everyone, but it certainly has worked for me.
Yeah. Well, it's I remember when I was doing my training, and I was still have a full-time job, and the training was at least 4 to 10 hours a week that I dedicate to that. And the only thing I did was I changed my priorities. You know, my boys were still little at that time. So they would go to bed at 8 o'clock, something like that in the evening. And we used to watch television from 8 till 11, something like that, right? And the only thing I did was I stopped binge watching, right? I didn't watch television anymore. I just dedicated that time slot for doing my exercises, for doing my education, doing my training. So I already freed up 15 hours per week on working days, on business days. And I could also free up some more time in the weekends. So it's not that you don't have enough time. It's you have to dedicate your time to the right activities. You know, it's prioritizing.
You're absolutely correct. And like you, I used to watch far more television than I do now. And you realize, what am I getting from that television? And I don't watch the news anymore. I'd rather scan it and digest the things that I think are important online. And let's face it, a lot of television is just not that great.
Exactly. Right.
Until they make a TV series out of my books, then of course it'll be great.
Oh, of course, but that's another priority. No plans for film scripts, Pat?
No, not in the near future anyway.
Well, you never know what comes, right?
Yeah, that's right. If Steven Spielberg calls, I'll take the call.
Yeah, well, maybe even George Lucas, you know, if he's interested in a near future film. You won't put him on hold, probably.
No, I would not put him on hold.
So you already said you're working on the third one. Any idea where this will end?
I do. I know where the ending is, and now it's filling in between where the story is now and getting to that ending. Because I realized that you can get stuck writing a story forever. And you look at some of the authors out there like Robert Jordan, who wrote the Wheel of Time series, 10 volumes. That's a lot of work. And then George R.R. Martin, who never actually finished his Game of Thrones series of books. It went to the point that the television series surpassed his books, and he couldn't even keep up with that writing. So I want to make sure I have a definitive end point for the story, so that then I can move on to something else.
Nice. That's a great cliffhanger, Pat. We're looking forward to the end, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think we can talk for hours on science fiction and all the beautiful stories. For instance, what I love about science fiction is how the writers came up with this possible futures, you know, or actually some of them are eventually plausible futures, right? If you look at the Matrix, you know, it's plausible. You never know, right?
Yeah.
Look at just a movie like I, Robot, which was a story from Isaac Asimov, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
It's also plausible, you know, and it always amazes me how those writers come up with those stories. So, what's your opinion on that?
Some of them, like the fact of using human beings as batteries. That just seems grossly inefficient, the way they do in the Matrix. However, using the human brain as a computing device or a visioning device, I think makes a lot of sense. And the iRobot, to me, is a little more plausible and a little more chilling, because as human beings, we love to offload the labor. You know, let someone else do the wash, let someone else do the heavy lifting. The problem then becomes that there are also human beings who want to control things. And so if they can get in control of the robot workforce, then suddenly it's no longer the happy future. It's a very dystopian one. I talk about AIs in my book, and I'm always worried about the Terminator series and Skynet, and would an AI actually want to kill all the human beings? And I think, yeah, maybe. If they don't have a good reason for keeping us around, why keep us?
Yeah, and it's also, if you look at the robot laws, that you shouldn't hurt, you should keep a human safe, right? You shouldn't hurt them, and you have to keep yourself safe. If you look at iRobot, then the logic is there, right? Because if you isolate every human being, they're safe.
Yep.
But it means that we're getting we're becoming prisoners, and that's not what you want. So it also I think it shows that no matter how intelligent or complex that you're defining the rules, that you're programming, in AI or robots or whatever, there will always be flaws, because you can't make it foolproof.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole Asimovian logic of which human being do you save if they're in equally dangerous situations. That's an incredibly hard problem to solve. And so do you save neither? How do you choose which one? It's a difficult thing, and you have to also balance. One of the things I talk with my clients about a lot is you have to accept some risk, but it's important to define that risk as much as possible before you execute your plan, because there will always be some risk. It's important just to not accept the risk without thinking about it ahead of time.
Yeah, and it's also that you have those situations where, for instance, killing one person saves 100 or 1,000 people, right? Yeah. And just imagine the complexity of defining such a rule. It's almost impossible. It's like gut instinct. It's a feeling. It's you can't put it in zeros and ones, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about, and if you make it personal, suddenly it's okay. If my child were to die, it would save 100 other people. Well, I'm sorry, if that's my decision, those 100 people are going to die because I'm going to save my child. So many things go into that decision. Incredibly complex.
Well, luckily, you only have to write about it, Pat.
That's right. It won't be my decision to make.
Exactly. Right. Pat, I really like a conversation. If you could share a little tip or a little piece of wisdom with the audience, what would it be?
Okay. A couple of things come to mind. One of the best tips I got in terms of writing is your first draft should always be written fast, bad, and wrong. Now, even that sentence is not good English. But it's a good point that sometimes it's necessary just to get the initial draft done, to work your way through the story, and then you go back and refine it. And then lately, I've been thinking more and more about following our passions. And I think it's important that we do it, but I think it's important that when we follow our passions, we need to know that passion may not lead to wealth or fame. You think about some highly successful people, Van Gogh, phenomenal artist who died penniless, whose work was never really appreciated until well after his death. Well, he's certainly successful, and he followed his passion, but it did not lead him to a life of wealth and leisure. And I think that's also a risk that we need to have our eyes open towards, that we can follow our passion. It just may not pay off quickly, or maybe at all.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I also think that if you're following your passion, and you can live from it, then it shouldn't be about the money, right? I sometimes say that some people are so poor, all they have is money, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
nice.
It's about, if you're following your passion and you're making a living out of it, you can, let's say, just do a little bit better than just surviving, right? And you're satisfied with the circumstances, then you're living a great life because you're following your passion, you do what you love to do, and you're finding some people that are willing to pay for it. And it's about finding those people that are willing to pay you for following your passion. I think I think that would be the trick.
Yes, and that's a good one, and it's important too, because as you say, if your passion is to be wealthy, then maybe your passion is misguided, because it's probably not just a bunch of money that you want. Maybe it's what you would do in that situation if you had the leisure or had the money. So sometimes we have to reframe, I think, what our passion actually is.
Yeah, nicely put, Pat. That's actually my core business, I would almost say. So, Pat, if people want to know more about you, get in touch with you, or maybe even buy a book, how can they do that?
Okay, the books are available on Amazon. The book is titled Spark. And then to learn more about me or my business, or to follow me, I am on LinkedIn, of course, but also my website is thepatdaily.com.
Thepatdaily.com. I guess there's only one of them.
Well, actually, no, because someone else already owned patdaily.com. So
Nice. So, Pat, thank you for this wonderful conversation. I hope you had a great time, just like I had. And let's stay in touch.